had a question about femoral acetabular impingement, and I thought I'd do a quick recording so I could go through it easier. So the question is, hey Don, I have FAI or cam impingements on both my hips. Is it possible to improve my range of motion to the extent of being able to high kick without surgery? So to explain, this kind of impingement happens because there's an extra bit of bone on the top of the femur, the thigh bone, as it joins into the hip socket. And in certain positions of the knee relative to the hip and how you articulate that femur, you'll get nips. So the bone will actually pinch against the bone or against some of the soft tissue and restrict the movement and cause some pain. Now, I personally suffer from FAI in my left hip as well. So it's something I do have firsthand experience of myself. And it hasn't actually cropped up for me until I was about 45, 46 years old. I think it was something that was always there, but there wasn't enough damage going on. But over the years, with everything I've been doing, it has caused me an issue. And now I do get pain and discomfort with certain movements. And those certain movements are, and I was going to get an image up for those of you watching the video version of this, when your hip is internally rotated. So that's when your knee buckles in and your foot and ankle effectively turns outwards. So knees caving in, that kind of shape. And that nip is also exaggerated when you have a deep hip flex. So when your knee is really high relative to your pelvis. So if you're down at the bottom of a squat, like this position, and the knees are caved in, that's serious impingement going on there. If you've got that extra lump of bone on the femur that's nipping into the pelvis there. That's the shape that's going to give you problems. So to show you a shape that doesn't give you problems, it's this kind of shape with the hips externally rotated and actually not so deep in the squat as well. So if your knees are turned out and you're kind of more stretching the groin, the adductors, then that's not going to impinge your hip so much. And of course, this all depends on how bad your particular hip impingement is. It depends on how big that lump of bone is for you, how much impingement you get, what sort of restrictions you've got, and in my case as well, how much historical damage has happened all around the sort of soft tissue in their socket as well. But generally, if you look at these two shapes, if this is a shape that doesn't cause impingement, this is more the kind of hip shape you have when you're kicking, knees turned out, you're kind of nice and open. And that valgus collapse is something that we don't really want in kicking. So as long as you're adopting this clean kicking shape, then you're not going to have problems effectively with your FAI, your hip impingement. So when you're in a Muay Thai stance, you're not down deep in the flex there. And when you're kicking, you haven't got that valgus collapse either. So that combination there means that your kick should be good. And I personally don't have problems kicking with that left hip, either standing on it or kicking up at the top. So if you just stay away from internally rotated knee and a real deep hip flex, so things like a pigeon pose stretch, if that kind of thing really niggles it, stay away from that kind of stuff. Make sure you're stretching the adductors themselves. So lots of foam rolling, tack and stretch on the adductors on the inside, the groin muscles there, all the way up into the hip to keep that knee open position. Lots of stretching, kind of like the side splits, box splits. That's all good to make sure you can keep that external range of motion that's going to keep away from the impingement. And just be careful when the knee is up above the pelvis there. That's going to be another kind of, that flex is the bit that's going to get you. So in terms of Muay Thai technique, it's when you're doing particular shin blocks, the checking movement, if the knee's really high, it's got to be a bit careful as to how you're positioning that. You might be able to rotate and turn a little bit so that it's not impinging. And some particular knee strikes as well. You might have to be a bit careful how you're throwing those. But generally, when it comes to Muay Thai, we're not down in that deep flex. It's mainly when you're doing your exercises that you're going to have to stay away from things that are going to aggravate it. And actually, in terms of exercises, stuff you can do to improve it, other than the stretching the adductors, like I've already said, to get that external movement into the hips, strengthening up the external rotation on the hips is really useful. So band resisted squats where you're trying to collapse the knees in, force out against that. So work that and just be careful to the depth you go to. I personally, even though I've got that impingement, can get into a real deep front squat, right down backside to calves pretty much without any problems at all if my knees are out. So, my impingement isn't super bad. But if I'm on single leg exercise, I have to be really careful how my pelvis is positioned as I'm stabilizing. If I let that pelvis drop a little bit, I get an impingement. So just be careful there. Something like a sideline clam as well is really useful to help you work into that external rotation too. And you can put some bands to resist that to increase the training effect of that as well. So yes, you can do high kicks if you've got FAI, if you've got those hip impingements, and there are certainly some things you can do in the gym to help offset that problem. And there are certain movements that you'd probably be best to avoid to make sure you're not aggravating it and making it more painful.